Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're your shortcut to getting past the headlines, right into the heart of fascinating subjects. And today, well, we're tackling one that's definitely wrapped in mystery, maybe even a bit of fear for some people: Freemasonry. When you think Freemasonry, maybe you picture, I don't know, strange handshakes, secret plots, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
You're definitely not the only one thinking that way. So for this deep dive, we've gathered quite a bit of material. We've got historical stuff from Wikipedia, official reports from the big one in England, the UGLE, insights from Freemasons for Dummies. Surprisingly useful, actually. And even stuff from that recent documentary, Inside the Freemasons, which was pretty eye-opening.
Yeah, it really was. And our goal today really is to cut through all those myths you mentioned, the funny handshakes, the rolled up trousers, even goats, bizarrely enough. We want to get to the surprising reality underneath, give you a clear picture of what Freemasonry actually is, how it works, and maybe why it's been around for, well, centuries. Basically, we want to give you the inside track, make you the informed one in the room on this.
Okay, so let's jump right in. What is Freemasonry, fundamentally? Our sources say it's basically fraternal groups, and their origins go way back, like medieval stonemason guilds.
That's right. And what's kind of amazing is that it's the oldest secular fraternity in the world, and just generally one of the oldest organizations still going, full stop.
That age alone tells you something, doesn't it? There's some kind of core need it's
Yeah.
fulfilling, community purpose.
Exactly. And members often describe it using this specific phrase: a beautiful system of morality, veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. So the core principles are all about self-improvement, things like honor, decency, personal responsibility, definitely charity, goodwill. And they teach these things through allegorical dramas, sort of like morality plays.
Right, which naturally brings up the big question, is it a religion? Because it sounds quite moral, quite principled.
That's a really common question.
Yep.
But the sources are very clear. No, it's not a religion. And it's not meant to replace religion either. They're very careful not to push one faith over another.
Okay, so not a religion.
But, and this is an important but, Anglo-American Freemasonry, the more traditional kind, is religious in the sense that you generally have to believe in a supreme being. Crucially, though, how you interpret that supreme being, that's completely up to the individual member. And to keep things harmonious, any kind of religious debate inside the lodge meeting, strictly forbidden. Same goes for politics, actually.
Ah, okay. Keeps the peace. Now, what about the whole secret society thing? That's probably the biggest label attached to them.
It really is, and it's something they push back against quite strongly. They prefer the term a society with secrets.
A society with secrets. What's the difference there?
Well, think of it like planning a surprise party. The fun is partly in the reveal, right? It's not that everything is hidden, but certain elements, the rituals, the meanings, are kept for the members to experience themselves. That documentary, Inside the Freemasons, actually made a point of saying, no goats involved, debunking those really wild myths.
Right, no goats. Good to know.
Exactly. The reality is much more, well, symbolic. A lot of the so-called secrets are actually about the tools from the original stonemasons, the square and compasses, the famous symbol, but also the level, the plumb rule, the trowel, those rough and smooth stones called ashlars.
And these aren't just tools.
No, they're symbols. Either one has a moral lesson attached, taught through allegory. They explore these meanings in rituals, through lectures, discussions. It's all about building character, metaphorically speaking.
Okay, interesting. So moving from what it is,
Yeah.
how does it actually work? How is it structured? And how does someone even join?
Right. The basic building block is the Masonic Lodge. Think of it like a local chapter or branch. They have regular meetings. Part of it is business, minutes, elections, planning events.
Standard stuff for any organization.
Pretty much. But then there's the other side. The ritual work, educational talks, philosophical debates. That's really the core of the Masonic experience in the lodge.
And joining. You mentioned they don't recruit, like, say, a club trying to get members.
Exactly. That's a really key point across the board. Freemasonry generally doesn't do active recruitment. You can't just sign up online, usually. The rule is a potential candidate has to ask. It has to come from their own free will and accord, as the old phrase goes. Or sometimes an existing member might discreetly sound someone out if they think they'd be a good fit.
So you have to take the initiative. Okay, what happens then? You knock on the door and say, I want to join.
Sort of. Once you express interest, there's usually a process. You'll likely need sponsors, often two members already in the lodge. One might act as a sort of mentor, a godfather figure.
Okay.
Then come the interviews. Sometimes there's several, maybe three. They want to get a sense of your character, why you want to join, if you're a good fit. It's a two-way street. You're assessing them, too.
Sounds pretty thorough.
It is. After that, if everyone's happy, there's a formal application. And then the famous ballot.
The black and white balls.
That's the one. Traditionally, white balls meant yes, black balls meant no. And that's literally where we get the expression being blackballed.
Okay. Makes sense.
There's also this interesting step sometimes called passing under the blindfold. The candidate might answer final questions blindfolded so members can ask freely. And if the vote goes against the candidate, the voters remain anonymous to him.
Wow. So who is actually eligible? You mentioned belief in a supreme being for some.
Right. There are differences. For the Anglo-American tradition, think UGLE in England. Most U.S. Grand Lodges, typically, you need to be a man. Usually 21 or over, though some places allow 18. You also need to be freeborn, an old term, basically meaning not enslaved, now more symbolic of free will, of good reputation, good character, and yes, believe in a supreme being. Some specific types, like the Swedish Rite, are even stricter. They only accept Christians.
Okay. But you mentioned another type, liberal Freemasonry.
Yes, the continental or liberal tradition, like the Grand Orient de France we mentioned, they took a different path. Their big thing is freedom of conscience. So they welcome atheists, agnostics. Religious belief isn't a requirement, and often these groups welcome women too, either in mixed lodges or women-only ones. The focus is really on moral character, philosophy, social progress, less on the religious aspect.
So different flavors of Freemasonry. Once someone is accepted, what happens next? You mentioned degrees.
That's right. You progress through three initial stages called the craft degrees. First is entered apprentice.
Right.
Then comes fellow craft, sometimes called journeyman. And finally, master mason. That's the sort of foundational completion.
And each degree involves
Right.
learning secrets.
Well, yes and no. With each degree, you take new obligations, promises, basically, and you are entrusted with certain secrets, things like specific passwords, handshakes, or grips, signs. But honestly, most of those are pretty easy to find online or in books nowadays if you really look. That's not the main point anymore.
So what is the point of the degrees then?
It's about the journey. It's a structured way to learn. You explore the symbols more deeply, participate in those allegorical plays we talked about, often centered around building King Solomon's temple and the story of its architect, Hiram Abiff. To move from one degree to the next, you usually have to show you've learned something. Maybe give a presentation, answer questions, learn parts of the ritual. It's about progressive learning and development.
And after Master Mason, is that?
For the basic lodge experience, yes. But if you want more, there are lots of other Masonic groups you can join as a Master Mason. You hear about the Scottish Rite with its 33 degrees, or the York Rite, which has things like the Royal Arch, Knights Templar. These offer further sort of specialized philosophical exploration.
Okay, so a whole world beyond the first three steps. Let's shift gears a bit now and look at the history. You said it goes back to medieval stonemasons.
Absolutely. The connection is real. We have documents like the Regis poem from way back around 1425 that lay out rules for masons. It shows this link between the original operative masons, the guys actually building cathedrals, and today's speculative masons using the tools as symbols.
Wow, 1425, that's old.
It really is. And there's a lodge in Scotland, the Lodge of Edinburgh, Mary's Chapel No. 1. They claim to be the oldest lodge in the world, with written records going back to 1598. Continuously.
Incredible. But the Freemasonry we know today, the organized version, when did that start?
The key date is June 24th, 1717, St. John's Day. 4 existing lodges in London got together for dinner at the Goose and Gridiron pub, great name, and decided to form a Grand Lodge. That became the Grand Lodge of London and Westminster, and eventually the United Grand Lodge of England, or UGLE. That was the birth of modern organized Freemasonry.
1717. And then it really took off, right?
Yeah.
Especially during the Enlightenment.
Massively. In the 18th century, it just spread like wildfire across Europe, the American colonies. It became quite fashionable, actually, and it really chimed with Enlightenment ideas, liberty, equality, fraternity, religious tolerance, rational inquiry. The lodges themselves were kind of like little laboratories for self-government with constitutions and elections.
So it wasn't just a social club. It had this sort of political or philosophical edge.
Definitely. Historian Norman Davies argued it was a huge force, especially for liberalism, from the
Mm.
1700s right up into the 20th century.
And loads of famous people were Masons back then.
Oh, absolutely. Big names. Think Enlightenment thinkers like Montesquieu, Voltaire, composers like Mozart, writers like Goethe, and over in America, key figures like Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, their involvement shows how appealing it was to people shaping that era.
But things didn't stay completely unified, did they? You mentioned a split between Anglo-American and continental Freemasonry.
That's right, a major division happened, and it really shapes Freemasonry even today. There were a few factors. One early point of friction was actually over race in the U.S. Around 1868, the Grand Lodge of Louisiana was discriminating against black Masons. The Grand Orient de France, that's the main body in France, declared that race or religion couldn't bar someone from Masonry. This caused some American Grand Lodges to break ties with them.
Okay, so early signs of different philosophies.
Exactly. But the really decisive break came in 1877. The Grand Orient de France made a huge change to its constitution. They removed the requirement for members to believe in a supreme being. They fully embraced absolute freedom of conscience. For them, it was about intellectual and philosophical liberty above all.
And the English Grand Lodge didn't like that.
Not at all. For the UGLE, belief in a supreme being was non-negotiable, so they withdrew recognition from the Grand Orient de France. And that basic split, one side requiring belief in God, the other emphasizing freedom of conscience above all, has defined the two main branches ever since.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So fast forward to today. How does this history play out in the modern world? Freemasonry has faced a lot of opposition over the years, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. A long history of anti-Masonry. It comes from different places. There's religious opposition. The Catholic Church has banned membership since 1738, and Pope Francis just reaffirmed that in 2023. Some Protestant groups are also opposed, as are some Islamic authorities.
And politically.
Politically, too. In the U.S., there was actually an anti-Masonic political party back in the 1820s and 30s, sparked by the disappearance of a guy named William Morgan, who threatened to expose Masonic secrets. More recently, you had the P2 Lodge scandal in Italy in the 80s, involving corruption and political intrigue, although that lodge was considered irregular by mainstream Masonry.
And hasn't there been outright persecution, too?
Very severe persecution, tragically, under authoritarian regimes particularly. The Nazis targeted Freemasons intensely. Estimates are that up to 200,000 Masons died in concentration camps. Even now, it's still banned in places like mainland China, Pakistan, Iraq.
Why such intense opposition? What are they accused of?
Often, it gets tied up with wider conspiracy theories. You know, the idea of a secret cabal controlling the world, the New World Order, the Illuminati. Freemasonry often gets lumped into that. Anti-Masonry and anti-Semitism have frequently gone hand in hand as well.
So this history of opposition, plus maybe changing times, has that affected membership?
Definitely. In the Anglo-American world, the numbers have dropped quite dramatically in recent decades. Take the UGLE in England. They apparently had around 500,000 members in the 1960s. By 2023, down to about 170,000.
Wow, that's a big drop.
It is. Same story in the U.S. mainstream lodges. Peaked at over 4 million members in the late 1950s. Now, maybe around 875,000.
Any idea why such a decline? Is it just becoming irrelevant?
Well, it's complex. Part of it might be a general decline in people joining fraternal organizations. Societies change. The secrecy aspect, even if misunderstood, might put some people off. But it's interesting. Remember the Grand Orient de France? The liberal one?
Yeah, the ones who dropped the God requirements.
Exactly. Their membership has actually grown significantly over a similar period. They went from about 33,000 in 1960 to over 53,000 in 2023.
Really? So their approach seems to be resonating more, perhaps.
It suggests that their focus on philosophy, social issues, and freedom of thought might have a strong appeal in certain modern contexts. It's a striking contrast.
Despite the decline in some areas, are they trying to adapt, modernize?
Oh, for sure. There's definitely a push towards more openness, more transparency. That documentary, Inside the Freemasons, was a big step for the UGLE. Letting cameras in for their 300th anniversary in 2017, that was pretty unprecedented, showing the ceremonies, the meetings, trying to demystify it.
Playing back the curtain a bit.
Exactly, trying to show it's not as weird or sinister as the myths suggest. It's interesting, before World War II, apparently Masons used to parade in public quite openly in their regalia. The secrecy built up more afterwards.
And what about the charity work? Is that still a big part?
Huge. It's probably one of the least talked about but most significant aspects. Just one example. The Masonic Charitable Foundation in the UK gave out something like 20 million in grants in 2015, and a big chunk of that, maybe 5 million pounds, went to non-Masonic causes, things like the Scouts, air ambulances, hospices.
So it's not just charity for Masons and their family.
No, definitely not. It's broad community support. And individual lodges do tons of local fundraising too, through dinners, social events, that kind of thing. It's a massive, often unseen philanthropic effort.
Okay. Another area of change must be women, right? You mentioned the liberal branch often includes women. What about the more traditional side?
That's been a really interesting evolution. Historically, mainstream Masonry was exclusively male. There were early experiments like lodges of adoption in France in the 18th century, kind of auxiliary bodies for female relatives. But the big turning point for women's involvement, separate from men, really started around the initiation of Marie de Risnom in France in 1882. That led to mixed gender orders like Le Droit Humain.
So women have had their own Masonic groups for a long time.
Yes, for well over a century. And the stance of the traditional male bodies has softened over time. In 1999, the UGLE made a significant statement. They formally acknowledged that these women's Masonic orders are regular in their practice, meaning they follow the core Masonic principles correctly.
So they see them as legitimate Masons.
They see the organizations as legitimate in their own right, yes. They don't allow visiting between their male lodges and the women's lodges. They maintain that separation, but they recognize them as following Masonic tradition. And importantly, they now collaborate on charity projects and things like that. It's a big shift from outright denial.
And continuing that theme of inclusion, what about transgender members?
Another really significant modern adaptation. In 2018, the UGLE issued specific guidance. They stated very clearly, a Freemason who after initiation ceases to be a man does not cease to be a Freemason. Basically, if a member transitions after joining, they remain a Mason. They also provided guidance on admitting transgender men.
Wow. That feels quite progressive for such a traditional organization.
It shows a real effort to grapple with modern identities while staying true to their core tenets. It's about the person's character, not just their gender assigned at birth.
And are they finding new ways to attract members, given those declining numbers we talked about?
Yes, they're definitely trying new things. There are university schemes aimed at getting younger people involved earlier. And one really interesting trend is the rise of special interest lodges.
Special interest. Like what?
Lodges based around shared hobbies or professions. There are lodges for classic car enthusiasts, musicians, rugby players, you name it. Apparently, there's even a football lodge in England, with football-themed gavels and songs sung after meetings.
Seriously, a football lodge.
Yep. The idea is to bring people together who already have a common bond, making Freemasonry feel more relevant and accessible. They can point to history, too. Famous footballers like Stanley Matthews, Dixie Dean, even England's World Cup winning manager Alf Ramsey were Masons.
Huh. So linking it to modern interests. That makes sense. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, it feels like we've peeled back quite a few layers. Freemasonry seems way more complex, maybe more normal in some ways than the myths suggest. Not some shadowy cabal, but a fraternity focused on self-improvement, community, charity.
Exactly. It's definitely shifted from its operative roots to this speculative philosophical focus. It is a society with secrets, focused on that allegorical journey, rather than a truly secret society plotting world domination. Those myths, the goats, they're just not the reality.
So we've gone from medieval guilds to enlightenment ideals, through schisms and persecution, to modern adaptations like welcoming transgender members and football lodges. It's quite a story.
It really is. And maybe the final thought to leave you with is this. Considering its incredible longevity, its focus on personal growth, mutual support, huge charitable work, and its proven ability to adapt over centuries, despite facing down some pretty intense opposition, what does its sheer survival, its continued evolution, tell us? About a deep, maybe timeless human need for community, for shared purpose, for structure, something that sits outside of just politics or organized religion. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What enduring need does something like Freemasonry continue to fulfill in our world? Something to think about.